Brian Lehrer on WNYC. It's our special Brian Lehrer show today. The weekend shows visit us on a weekday. We're kind of starting the weekend one day early for so much fun and interesting content that these shows always bring, and to help with our 2-for-1 matching day. Our colleagues at On the Media are out with the first 2 episodes of a brand new 4-part series that maybe you've started listening to about the Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA. President Trump and the MAGA movement have made FEMA a major target. The series is called American Emergency, the Movement to Kill FEMA. The first episode, which dropped on May 1st, traces FEMA's secretive Cold War origins. This includes classified bunkers, martial law planning, and covert refugee camp scouting. The series argues that those origins, freaky as they sound, really seeded the conspiracy theories that haunt the agency today and that are often parroted by right-wing skeptics of the agencies on the internet and within the Trump administration itself. Just last week, the Trump-appointed FEMA Review Council released its final report calling for sweeping overhauls that would shift disaster response leadership to the states. The states can afford that themselves, like after a Hurricane Katrina or something, right? Joining us now are On the Media hosts, Micah Loewinger and Brooke Gladstone. Again, the 4-part series is called American Emergency, the Movement to Kill FEMA, reported by Micah and senior producer Eloise Blondio. Hey, Micah and Brooke, welcome back to this show.
Hi.
Micah, for listeners who may think of FEMA as just, the agency that shows up after a hurricane, what made you want to go back to the very beginning of this agency's history to understand what's happening to it right now?
Great question. I mean, honestly, FEMA is an incredibly important agency, but it's also an agency I think most Americans don't really think about ever, except for like on the worst day of their life when they've lost everything and they need help rebuilding, finding a place to live, and their local government needs help rebuilding roads and bridges. And so as I started kind of looking at FEMA, this extremely unpopular agency, it's one of the most unpopular in the federal government, I wanted to understand, like, why is the Trump administration targeting something that seems to help everyone, blue states, red states, that is playing an increasingly essential role in our current climate crisis when extreme weather is growing more costly, deadly, harder to track and understand. So I wanted to look at the beginning of FEMA because I kept hearing these conspiracy theories from MAGA about FEMA camps, secret prisons around the country that were going to round up political dissidents and this kind of thing. And it's like, it's the kind of thing where, like, if you're in the lore, it makes sense. But if you're like us and you're an outsider just trying to understand the things that people say on the internet, you're like, what are they even talking about? And then when I dug into the origins of FEMA during the Cold War, I learned, like, well, yeah, the federal government has been keeping a lot of secrets from us for a very long time. And that's because FEMA is kind of part of this infrastructure to help save our government from some kind of big attack. So it struck me that, this secrecy kind of helped explain a lot of the crisis at the agency we're seeing today.
So let me give listeners one clip from your series that ties to one example of what you were just describing. Back in 1982, President Ronald Reagan signed an executive order, you tell us, to create a covert program called Project 908. Just the name sounds mysterious and covert and threatening. Using the naught instead of zero, Project 908. And this project had FBI agents working undercover for FEMA, you tell us, traveling around the country, visiting Walmarts and other businesses in order to identify locations that could be used to house U.S. citizens. And you spoke with retired FEMA official Leo Bosner, who was, at the time, fed up with the shift away from natural disaster preparedness to the spy versus spy stuff. Let's take a listen.
There were some pretty nutty people working back there then. Fortunately, nothing much ever came of that, except they ate up most of our budget.
He was eager for the agency to shift resources to preparing for floods and hurricanes. But all this doomsday planning had done a number on FEMA's reputation.
I would talk on my off-duty time to people on Capitol Hill or news reporters and say, look, this is a dangerous thing. We're ignoring these natural disasters. And I was having lunch with a news reporter one day, and I'm telling him this. And the guy's looking really bored. He says, yeah, Leo, that's all really bad, but tell me about FEMA's secret plan to round up all the liberals in the country and put them in concentration camps.
What?
Yeah, I said, buddy, these people are so inept, they couldn't organize a 2-car parade, and they're never going to round up everybody in the country. Come on, get out of here, will you?
So unpack that for us a little, Micah. What was real there?
Okay, so this is really wild history, and I encourage you to listen to the episode to get full context. But essentially, during the Cold War, the government started to game out a lot of doomsday scenarios. Like, what would we actually do if a nuke were dropped on New York City or Washington, D.C.? And, serious people with access to serious resources wrote real plans for this kind of thing. And so, as you mentioned, the FBI, under this secret executive order, Project 908, started trying to scope out places where we might have refugee camps for worst case scenario, like 60 million Americans surviving this kind of nuclear assault. And at the same time, the Reagan administration drafted potential plans for declaring martial law. Like, how could you sort of quell the chaos and anarchy after a nuke, and how would you ensure that the U.S. government could lead the country onward? And so in the late 80s, the Miami Herald learns of these like secret martial law plans. It leads to this blockbuster report. Some U.S. officials are even questioned about it during the Iran-Contra affair. And the public never really gets too much clarity on like these really disturbing plans. Sure. But the fact that they existed continues to sort of power conspiracy theories about what FEMA may or may not actually be hiding from us. Even though a lot of what the conspiracy theorists say today is like completely unfounded in truth, that history is real.
And before we bring on Brooke to talk about one of the things that she's working on, the end of your first episode really scrambled my brains, because you have the right saying that FEMA has all these dark conspiracy theories, which you said had no basis in fact. But now FEMA money is going toward detention of migrants, including funding tied to that facility in the Everglades that critics have likened to a concentration camp, Alligator Alcatraz. So how did you come to that connection in your reporting? And does the right now like FEMA if they take a second look?
So that's a really interesting question. While I was reporting out the sort of origins of this conspiracy theory, I read that FEMA had announced a new program to encourage states to build their own migrant detention centers, because, of course, the Trump administration was looking for any and all help it could get to facilitate this massive operation. And so FEMA did actually promise at one point to pay for Alligator Alcatraz, something like $600 million. That money ended up getting like kind of tied up in court. And so it's kind of uncertain whether the money will actually go to Alligator Alcatraz. But to your point, there's an incredible irony that after, many years of Alex Jones, Glenn Beck, militia leaders, sort of cranks online claiming that FEMA is part of some secret plot to round up American citizens and put them in concentration camps, that the Trump administration would literally attempt to use FEMA to build what some people have called Alligator Alcatraz a concentration camp. Like, it scrambled my brain as well. And I just kind of think it speaks to sort of how MAGA operates, which is that they in their sort of path to power have been effective at kind of exploiting people's fears and anxieties about government, even if when in power they may sort of abuse it in ways that make us really uncomfortable and kind of confound us.
All right. Brooke, thanks so much for hanging on and agreeing that this segment would be mostly a Micah segment because of the prominence of his FEMA special. But you've got a preview of this weekend's episode of On the Media's regular programming, I see you interviewed journalist G. Elliott Morris on what he calls the simple statistical error that Republican Supreme Court justices or Republican-appointed justices recently used to gut the Voting Rights Act. We've talked on this program a lot about the legal fallout from this decision, Louisiana versus Calais. What's this statistical error?
Well, the statistical error is Alito's, and basically it says that you can, if you want to claim that when redistricting, states or whoever's doing it is doing it on the basis of race, you have to filter out the party part. Because in an earlier decision, the Supreme Court said it's okay to gerrymander based on party, but not on race. The statistical error is to think that you can control for party when you're addressing the issue of race, when race actually helps shape party identification, and then party identification helps shape the vote choice. You can't separate them. You cannot delete that because, like many other things, your location, your economic standard, your perhaps your religious beliefs, all of these things build into how you make your choice to vote. But one of the preeminent identities that we all have, it turns out, is our party identity in most cases. And there are huge elements that feed into them. You can't pull them out. They are not separate factors. They are integral to that decision. So that is, Morris told me that if this had been in a student's paper, it would have been returned covered with red ink.
Does anybody in the media, since your show is on the media, get to ask Alito a question like that?
I don't know. I don't think anybody's asking Alito any questions. Do they ever submit to interviews? Very rarely. And we know Alito is not a big fan of the press. But the point is that the Voting Act now has been pretty much gutted. It used to have 2 points, a sword and a shield. The shield was Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act, and it gave states, counties, and cities with a record of racial discrimination. It required them to get permission from the government before they could change the maps around election time. That shield was removed in 2013 in a decision called Shelby County versus Holder. The Act sword is Section 2. And that now is what the Justice Department has blunted because it has made it basically impossible to challenge unfair maps in a way that is absolutely mind-blowing.
Brooke, before you go, give our listeners your take on the importance or the role of On the Media as you see it right now. I mean, everybody listening right now knows that we live in a time where social media, with all its disinformation and everything else, is kind of taking over from, legit news organizations in terms of people's attention relatively. We also have this environment that you and I have discussed that all our listeners know of, corporate media in more and more cases pandering to what they think the government wants, which is not journalism as we think of it. What's the role of your show as you see it in 2026? Then we're out of time.
It's a very good question because the role of our show has changed year upon year, administration upon administration. Now the emphasis is just on giving a clear narrative that tells the truth, that is accurate, that is contextual, and that addresses what seems to be a dearth of information, like I think there's been about the Voting Act, or anything else, and also a narrative that seems to be predominant that is fundamentally based on a lie. That is our goal at the moment. We've never been awash in so much lying that our job a lot of times seems to be, here's the truth, here is why it's the truth, here is where the lie is coming from, and here is what we can do to help you make your way through the muck.
with their vital work deconstructing truth with a capital T and lies, I'll say with a small L, on the media hosts Brooke Gladstone and Micah Loewinger. Keep it up, you two.
Thanks, Brian.
Thank you too, Bri.
WNYC Studios is supported by AT&T. Summer. It's when we share more time, more memories, and more photos. And at AT&T, the iPhone 17 Pro is your summer essential. Its center stage front camera auto-adjusts the frame to fit everyone into group selfies. Right now at AT&T, you can get iPhone 17 Pro for $0 with eligible iPhone trade-in, any condition. Required trade-in of iPhone 15 Plus or higher, excluding iPhone 16e and 17e. Required eligible plan. Terms and restrictions apply. Subject to change. Visit att.com/iPhone or visit an AT&T store for details. WNYC's journalism and storytelling is heard by millions of passionate listeners. Sponsors of our programming gain our listeners' attention and their respect. Learn about how your organization can support WNYC and WNYC Studios at sponsorship.wnyc.org.